All right. Today we're going to be talking about what I call the Jewish roller coaster because there's a lot of ups and there's a lot of downs. So we're going to finish off our story with Moses, and then from there we're going to talk about the establishment of the Hebrew kingdom and how it reaches its heights, and then after that we're going to talk about how it crumbles fairly quickly, which is not good. So we'll pick it up with Moses. If you remember last time where we left him, he had just crossed the Red Sea and had the event of the Exodus, and they're making their way towards the Promised Land. So we'll pick up from there. Now, once Moses goes and crosses the Red Sea, very famous story here is the story of the Ten Commandments. Moses is going to go up for 40 days and 40 nights. You're going to see the numbers 40 and you're going to see the numbers 12 pop up a lot. It's kind of a, that's a 12, sorry. that is a 12. That's kind of a common thing that you see in biblical language, is the repetition number and numerology having significant meaning. So, anyways, back to the Ten Commandments. Moses is going to go up to the same spot that he saw the burning bush, talk to God, and receive the Ten Commandments. But while he's gone, people are going to get in a bit of trouble, and they're going to start turning into idols, specifically a golden calf that they make. And Moses comes down after 40 days, and he is furious for obvious reasons, because why would you go and make this golden calf? And this lovely golden calf causes him a lot of anguish and makes him mad. He slams down the Ten Commandments, the 2 tablets that it's on, and he orders a bunch of people to get killed because they're doing that. Yay. So, story of 10 Commandments given to God by Moses, and the golden calf resulting to idolatry, which is you should have no other God, you shouldn't worship idols. Now, after this period of receiving the 10 Commandments, there's going to be this wilderness period, which, you guessed it, lasts for 40 years. Now, essentially, the people get kind of whiny and complain. They say, we're hungry, we're thirsty. They even go so far and do the ultimate slap in the face of Moses and say, we wish we were still slaves in Egypt. Ouch. So that one kind of hurts. But God will provide for them during these times. He's going to provide manna. There's the women collecting manna there, the picture on the left. Basically, if you know the story, God provides basically like bread on the ground every day. Quail provides water. Moses hits a rock with a staff and provides water. And they have to go in the Promised Land. The issue of going in Canaan or the Promised Land is that there's people that are living there. So they're probably not going to be just too happy. Oh, here, your God wants you to have the land. Sure, go for it. So they're going to have to go conquer, basically fight and kill these people, convince them, convince them to leave. So what happens is Moses sends 12 spies into the Promised Land, and 10 of them come back, and 10 of them say, no way, Jose, this is not going to happen, we can't do it. 2 of them say yes, but obviously they're outnumbered. So Moses goes and essentially decides we're going to have to wait. And that's why they wander for 40 years in the wilderness. So they came out of the Exodus, which is awesome, and then they're going to have to wander for 40 years. Moses is going to basically see the Promised Land, but he is not going to be the dude that leads them into the Promised Land. So we'll pick it up with that dude on the next slide. Those are the 10 Commandments there. I'm not going to ask you on the exam, do you know the 10 Commandments? But the idea, the concept of receiving them from Moses, it's where he gets the name the lawgiver, because the 10 Commandments are known as the law, and he's the one that gave them. Like I said, he had to go and make them twice. So, Canaan, the Promised Land, it's actually going to come to one of the spies who went and said we could take it, and that's Joshua. And Joshua basically becomes the new leader after Moses passes away. And he kind of does a Moses 2.0. This right here is the Ark of the Covenant, and among other things, the most important thing inside the Ark are the 10 Commandments. If you've seen like Indiana Jones, you open it up and Nazis die, which is kind of cool. But anyways, they go, and the Ark of the Covenant is kind of like their sign that God is with them in battle. So when they go to battle, they're going to carry the Ark of the Covenant essentially right out in front. So anyways, Joshua pulls a Moses 2.0, and they cross the Jordan River, which is basically the line between the Promised Land and the non-Promised Land, and it like parts the seas, and they go and cross. Now, one of the most famous battles, they have a bunch of battles basically going and winning over the Promised Land, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, and you'll learn about the judges if you read the Old Testament. But the Battle of Jericho. Well, the Battle of Jericho, it's like basically a Mesopotamian walled city-state. If you think about that, there's a bunch of walls around, and the question is, how are you going to go conquer it? And the biblical story is actually pretty interesting, kind of fun story. Is the Israelites are essentially able to get a couple spies into the city and hide out and check it out, kind of get the surroundings. But they're granted safe passage by a woman named Rahab. Now, Rahab is interesting because she's basically going to be turning against her own people. Sorry, I'm writing with my finger. I don't have my pen today. And she's a prostitute, which obviously is like the lowest of the low on the social ladder. So she's going to help out a couple Israelites and help the spies. When the Israelites are going to eventually go into the city, the way they'll identify Rahab's house and not kill her and the spies, basically they'll put something outside her door. So how are they going to conquer Jericho? Well, they kind of have a weird battle strategy, which I wouldn't suggest. They're going to go and basically march around the city 6 times. You have the Ark of the Covenant and all that stuff on 6 different days. And on the 7th day, go and blow basically trumpets or into like horns of animals and then shout. And according to the story, they do that and bam, all the walls fall down. They storm into the city and kill everybody. Yay. Except for Rahab because her house has been identified. Some of the other nations here, you don't need to know this for the exam, but the idea that there are usually the ites, Canaanites, Hittites, Philistines, Phoenicians, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Midianites. So these are a bunch of people, like I said, that they live there. So here's Canaan, so Canaanites, Ammonites. They're going to have to conquer them. They're going to have to do something. Now, if you remember, Jacob had 12 different sons, and essentially the 12 different sons, their families, their descendants, because the sons aren't alive anymore, Jacob, that's been a while, they're going to go, and once the promised land is conquered, they're going to go and divide up the land among the different sons. So you can see their area there. So that's where you get the term, the 12 tribes of Israel. It's off of the 12 sons of Jacob. And some of them get like combined, but the idea there, you understand. Now the idea here of a kingdom, this is a controversial fact, because when you look, if you're a good Jewish person back then, would there be a king? Or who should be a king? Most people would say God is king, not a human. So for a while they don't have a king, but then they realize you kind of need a king, or we need some form of centralized government in order to fight off these outside invaders. So that's where the prophet Samuel is going to come into play, and we're going to have our very first Hebrew king, and you may have guessed it because it's right here. His name is Saul. Now Saul is known as standing head and shoulders above the rest because he was just a tall dude, and he goes and kicks a lot of butt, goes and fights a lot of these other people that I just showed 2 slides ago, all these ites. And Saul's a good warrior. Well, with that said, at some point in Saul's life, a young boy, kind of a little pipsqueak boy, is going to be anointed by Samuel, and he's going to be the future king. And his name, you guessed it, is David. So he's anointed by Samuel, basically saying, you are going to be the next king, which is kind of comical because he's this little pipsqueak, a little run of the litter. David is also known with Saul for his being a musician. David is everything. David is like what we call a Renaissance man. He's a musician, he's a poet, he's a fighter. He's a lover. I'm too much of a lover, which we'll talk about here in a second. So he's a little bit of everything. But with Saul, initially, he goes and is known for playing basically like a harp, a musical instrument, and going, and when Saul's having a tough time, basically, David's going to go and console him through his music and help him through some turmoil. And the famous story of the Philistines and Goliath has to do with David. So let me explain how this works. It's basically called symbolic combat, meaning back then, you wouldn't have, I mean, of course you would sometimes, but sometimes civilizations would go and say, we don't want our side, all of our side, to fight all of your side. Let's just take our best warrior, and you'll take yours, and whoever wins will win, and whoever loses, they'll lose the land. So it kind of just saves lives. Well, they choose the huge giant Goliath, and nobody wants to fight him, and David feels on fire for God, and he thinks he can do it. So he famously goes and fights Goliath with a slingshot. Remember, we talked about in class, it's not the Dennis the Menace slingshot. It's actually a legitimate weapon back then. And David's going to go, young shepherd boy, fight Goliath. He's going to hit him with a slingshot and then chop off his head. Yay! So now David is very, very popular, and Saul's obviously in debt to David. Now, Saul is going to become increasingly, as David gets older, is going to become increasingly hostile towards David, to the point that David's going to have to hide from Saul. And their relationship goes down the drain. And eventually, Saul is going to die in battle, and David is going to become king, because he's the obvious successor. He defeated Goliath. Like, who could do that? One of David's big things is that he's going to establish the capital at the very important city, the most important city to Jews, Jerusalem. So he's going to establish the capital. And one of the big things he wants to do, is go and create a temple, which I'll talk about because he's not going to be able to do it. This ties into his affair. So David is going to go, and one night he sees a woman named Bathsheba taking a bath, which is like easy to remember, I guess, because her name is Bathsheba. She's going and taking a bath on a roof, and he's attracted to her. He's married, she's married, and they're going to go have an affair. Well, her husband is away at battle. Well, he's going to come back home, and magically his wife is pregnant, and he wasn't there. So David creates a scheme to bring her husband, Uriah, back from the front lines for a period of time in order to hopefully conceive. But he doesn't, because he says all of his other buddies are in line, so he's not going to do that. David goes and makes the problem even worse and basically orders Uriah to be killed in battle. Basically, all the troops pull back, and then he's killed. So now David has had an affair with a married woman, and now her husband's killed, and she's pregnant, and God is not happy. And according to the story, basically David and his descendants are going to be punished in some form. So some forms of punishments. Punishment number 1, David will not be able to build a temple. God will not let him do that. Punishment number 2, this is the baby that Bathsheba has, dies within a week as well. And then there's just a bunch of other stuff that's going to happen within the family. I mentioned there's incest in the family. I mean, it gets really, really bad. Now, David, like I said, is kind of a Renaissance man. So he's also known for writing the Psalms. The Psalms, he doesn't write all of them, but the Psalms are basically a form of poetry or meant to be sung. It's a book in the Bible where he writes a lot of them, and they encompass everything. They encompass like the highs and lows, and David is famous just for the beauty of the Psalms, which we looked at Psalm 23, which is a very famous one, and a modern version of it sung as well. So the Psalms are created by David, and they kind of just show a full relationship with God. So David, despite his really good things that he accomplished, Goliath, establishing the capital at Jerusalem, all this stuff, is known for also being a man of a bit of nuance there, and having his personal tragedies as well. David's going to die, and then we'll talk about his son Solomon. So the capital is established at Jerusalem, and then we'll take a look at, like this says, the kingdoms of David and Solomon. Under these, this is where it's going to go, and it reaches its height. And you can pause here and take a look at that quote. Now, Solomon. Solomon is David's son, and with Solomon, you want to think about what I call the 3 W's: wealth, wives, and wisdom. Okay, I'll start with the wealth. Solomon made Bill Gates look like nothing. The guy was loaded. Loaded, had a bunch of money. And in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that Solomon started to care a bit too much about the money, if you know what I mean. Wives. The guy was a womanizer to the max. According to the Bible, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, okay? So 1,000 wives. That's bad enough in and of itself, but then also here's the bad part, was he's supposed to be the leader of the Jews, right? He's a political and a religious leader. They start going and converting him over to the foreign and pagan gods. So all of a sudden you have a leader that's kind of polytheistic, not so good, worshiping idols, all that stuff. Now, wisdom. Wisdom's the good part about him. Solomon is going to go, and basically he writes an how-to booklet, or if you want to think about that, for his son Rehoboam, who's going to be the next king after Solomon dies. And this book is called the Book of Proverbs, which is like a guide on ruling and how they're basically smart sayings, how stuff works. And from the Bible, if you know, that comes after the Psalms. So you can check out those. They're written by Solomon. One of the most famous stories I talked about in class was a story of Solomon and both women claiming to have a baby. And the idea was both women are fighting over a baby. We don't know who the baby is. What does Solomon suggest? Well, he suggests splitting the baby down in two, splitting in the middle, which doesn't sound that wise. But the story of the wisdom there is that the true mother would rather go and see somebody else raise the baby than go and see it split in half. So Solomon there shows his wisdom. He's also going to build the lovely temple here, which we'll take a look at, and has the place called the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies is basically the physical manifestation of where heaven and earth meet, where God dwells. It's a permanent version of the tabernacle. In the Holy of Holies, there's 3 different layers. The veil, which you know of about Jesus, the veil ripping. But the veil had 3 different colors. Blue for heaven, red for earth, and then purple as the combination of heaven and earth. It's where it literally met. So we'll take a look here at the temple, which unfortunately is going to get destroyed. Obviously, the 10 Commandments are kept there, all that stuff. And the sins, like I discussed, the wealth and his love of wealth, and then his multiple wives, and then them leading towards foreign pagan gods. So just some dimensions, a couple ways. These are actually the true dimensions if you read the Bible and were to go and sketch it out. Here's the Holy of Holies. Obviously, as you go deeper into the temple, it's holier, if you want to think about it that way. Another view as well, and another view. Now, after Solomon dies, things are going to go south pretty quickly, because his son Rehoboam is not a popular dude. He's known for raising the taxes and going and creating a lot of division within his kingdom. And it's going to split into two. In the north, 10 of the 12 tribes are going to join the north. And they're called the Kingdom of Israel, and the people that live there are called the Sumerians, because Samaria is the capital city. Now, they are not going to last that long, because they're going to get conquered by the Assyrians, and they literally get kicked out. We don't know what happens to them, hence the name, the 10 Lost Tribes of Israel, if you've heard of that. Your textbook goes into a lot of great detail about that, so I suggest taking a look about this kingdom. Then in the south, they're called Judah. The area is called Judah, and the people there are called Judeans. Well, initially in the south, they also get conquered by the Assyrians, but then the Assyrians themselves get conquered by the Babylonians. And the Babylonians are even worse than the Assyrians, which you'll learn is actually quite a statement as we talk about the Assyrians next time. The leader of the Babylonians, the $15 word that everybody loves to say, is Nebuchadnezzar, which you probably heard of before. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is a bad dude in and of itself, but what Nebuchadnezzar does, he goes and he takes all the Jews that live in the area in Judah, and he kicks them out. This is called the Babylonian exile. So he goes and he literally goes and kicks them out over here, destroys their temple, destroys all their stuff. And if you see here, they're all forced to flee. There's a great analogy, is like the Trail of Tears, if you learned about that last year in U.S. history. So he's going to go and kick them out, and that's why I call this the roller coaster of the Jews, because they're in this lesson here. You learned a lot about ups and downs, and right now it ends on a down. I know it's kind of a depressing note. And each unit we're going to see how they're doing, and kind of following the progression, and then eventually we'll make the connection to Christianity as well.